Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining today. Just a few housekeeping. You probably already saw that you automatically were muted as you came in. We'd prefer for you guys to remain muted. Feel free to turn your webcams on. We're in a new era, so we'd love to see everyone's faces if you'd like to. As we go through, if you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. We will try and answer questions throughout if it feels like it flows well. If not, we did reserve 20 minutes towards the end of our presentation to go through any questions that y'all have about launching your own career in financial planning. I'm going to give it just a few more seconds because there's quite a few people joining at the same time. Well, I have just 1 minute after 4, so I am going to go ahead and introduce everyone to Knut Rostad, who is the president of the Institute for the Fiduciary Standard.
Thank you, Anne-Marie, and thank you, Emily. I just want to take a few seconds to introduce this great audience to the Institute and Fiduciary September. The Institute is a nonprofit think tank that exists for only one purpose, and that is to advance fiduciary principles and practices in investment advice and financial planning, period, end of sentence. What you are seeing here today is one of 10 different panels that we put on during our what we call Fiduciary September. 10 years ago, we just proclaimed that forever going forward, September shall be known as Fiduciary September. And so we have put on programs to demonstrate how important fiduciary practices and principles are. So during this month, in our 10 panels, we've got over 30 speakers, and we believe it is the largest annual conversation of the importance of fiduciary principles among planners, advisors, and experts. So that is who we are. This is what we do, and the only other thing I will mention is that next week we will have a panel of millennial financial planners talk about the future of financial planning, and perhaps this audience might be interested in that as well. All our speakers are under the age of 35, and all of them I think have come from programs such as yours. So with that short introduction, again, thank you, Anne-Marie, and thank you, Emily, and I'll pass the baton to you.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Knut. And thank you all for joining us today for this Empowering Success webinar. As you kind of got from the title, we're going to be talking through launching a career in financial planning. So we'll kind of boil down some kind of 3 broad paths that we see that you can follow within financial planning services, and then what it means to be a fiduciary within all of those. But brief background on myself and Anne-Marie. I am a wealth manager at PlanCorp. PlanCorp is a $6 to $7 billion asset under management registered investment advisory firm. And so we are kind of in that fee-only camp, as we'll talk about later. And we really kind of work to serve, again, those clients. And so I'm based out of St. Louis. That wealth manager position likely looks the same, but a little different at a number of companies. We pretty much would think of that as, a couple positions past that entry-level role. So my kind of background prior to that is I got my undergraduate degree in financial planning at Western Kentucky University. When I started, I didn't know I wanted to go into finance, but quickly within my freshman year, switched over to the path and kind of got what I would say very involved in the finance department and the different planning that we had around that. And it really led me to kind of know that I wanted this as my career, which helped as I was looking for the kind of positions. And so we'll talk about a number of what I'm going to mention throughout the presentation, but as you figure out the path that you're looking for in this financial industry, there's really is kind of a broad ocean of companies and positions that you could work within that. And so, as I was looking for the position that I'm currently in, I wasn't really looking for any particular area or city. I was much more focused on the company that I was going to be working for and the job that I was going to be having, which gave me a little bit of flexibility to kind of look at some of those, bigger quote unquote cities and find more of that position that really worked out for me. So as I kind of mentioned, I ended up getting an internship with PlanCorp my junior year, fast forward senior year, I did that traditional kind of applying for jobs path, got a number of opportunities, but I really felt that none of them kind of checked my boxes, as we're going to talk about, in the way that PlanCorp did. So I accepted that role and kind of have now been here for a little over 3 years. So I serve as a I serve as a wealth manager here. I have that certification in the CFP, and as does Anne-Marie. So I'm going to pass that mic over now to let Anne-Marie introduce herself as well.
Thanks, Emily. I'm Anne-Marie Ashworth. I am a financial advisor with Abacus Planning Group. We are also an RIA based out of Columbia, South Carolina. We manage about $1.2 billion of assets on behalf of 220 families. We also have 30 employees, just to kind of give you a gauge as we're talking through what types of firms. So I've been with Abacus for about 7.5, almost 8 years now. And my current position is financial advisor. Like most of you, I started as a paraplanner, the entry level type of position, and then worked my way up through my tenure at Abacus. Background with me, like Emily, my background is also in financial planning. So I am a graduate of Virginia Tech. I went through the finance department, so I have a finance degree, and then my concentration was in financial planning. I had a little bit of a different experience than Emily, so I ended up doing the cold call route, where I reached out to probably 35 different companies in the Southeast for jobs, and did that route. So I'm looking forward to talking about that. But in the end, I actually ended up working with a headhunter, New Planner Recruiting. So they were the ones to help match me work with Abacus, and that is the end of where I've been. So that's my history. So what I wanted to first start with, as I practice sharing my screen again, it feels like we've done this for years and I should know exactly how to do it. Boom, first try. So what I wanted to bring up to you guys first is, when I knew I went into financial planning, I started as Emily and most of you, where you didn't really know what financial planning was. I went through probably 3 majors before I found that financial planning was my home. And I quickly realized that it's a very caring profession and you want to do what's right for your clients. And so I knew early on that I wanted to be a fiduciary. And so when I was back in school before 2015, there was a different ruling. And so there was what's called a suitability standard versus a fiduciary standard. And so when I went to school, you could work for a firm and they said, if you want to be a financial planner, you can give people these 5 products if you were to work at a broker dealer. However, not every client fits into a box, meaning that just because I can only give you these 5 products, they may be suitable, they might meet your goals, but they're not necessarily the best. And so that's what brings you to being a fiduciary. And as a fiduciary, I act in a capacity that puts my clients' needs, goals, desires ahead of my own, meaning that I have the flexibility to work with any other company, partner with them to make sure that if I'm looking for a specific product or service, whether it's health insurance or a life insurance policy or an annuity, that I have the ability to partner to give them exactly what they need to meet their goals. And so I'm going to turn it over to Emily to talk about the different general paths that we think about in financial planning, as well as some legislation, some literature that the Institute for Fiduciary Standard put out.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Anne-Marie. So as she kind of briefly mentioned, we tried to broadly define these different paths you see within the financial services industry into 3 different categories, so we can kind of better relate some of these things that we're going to be talking about. So as we both kind of mentioned, that first path that we're going to be talking about is the fee-only route. So that would be what Anne-Marie and myself both fall within. We're truly only receiving fees based on the services or the assets under management that we're providing. That's clearly outlined to the client upfront in some likely less than a page summary that's in kind of very blatant layman's terms that is very easy to process. That's really one of the kind of key holders of being a fiduciary. The next path that we would define would be the fee-based path. And so it's very similar to what we would say with the fee only. And then there's a potential for some additional alternatives that you can potentially receive additional commissions and services along the way. So we'll get into some of that as we talk through these common sense practices. And then the third path that we've defined is kind of that broker dealer path. And so that, as we'll get into, likely doesn't have as clearly defined services and fees. You likely don't have the same no conflicts that you would have in the fee only era. So circling back to this common sense, the Institute really tried to kind of look at it from these different paths, more from the consumer standpoint, and determine, as we're thinking about what it means to be a fiduciary, in theory, each advisor in these different paths is going to be working as a fiduciary to you by meeting these requirements, but it looks different in each applicable situation. So kind of the first thing that we all think about, or as kind of the consumers think about, is the education, making sure that you're properly educated to be able to give them the advice and planning we're doing. One thing that Anne-Marie and I really focused on, especially as we were even thinking about what it means to be a fiduciary from the fee-only standpoint in particular, is, you know, as you get any type of certification, there's the majority of the time that continuing education credit. And that really feeds back into the consumer to know that not only did you have the necessary education and background up front to do the planning, but you're also staying up to date with the different laws that are passed, the different areas of planning, and the different planning strategies that can potentially be used. In the avoiding and minimizing conflicts and disclosing fees, I think this is a really great example to where you can see some of the differences between the different paths. So with that fee-only path, you're not going to truly have an additional conflict of interest. You're only offering them the services and the planning that's clearly outlined in the agreement. You're not selling any additional products, and you don't have any third-party relations to additional providers that would bring in any additional fees on the other end. So even if that is the case, again, you can disclose those and still remain within that fiduciary standard. But at the end of the day, one of the things that we really look at is just by having that conflict of interest, even through disclosing that, that doesn't truly mean that at the end of the day, you might be doing what's in the best interest for clients. So kind of a path we see that as an example with the fee-based advisor is, you know, likely it's a very similar service to the fee only. And then an example would be potentially they have an insurance license. So as we're going through that area of the comprehensive planning, we determine, yes, you have some kind of insurance need. As a fee only advisor in my current position, I work with third-party individuals so they can shop the market and make sure that we're getting the best product for their needs at that cheapest kind of premium price on their end. And so if I were to have my license, even if I were to kind of use additional third-party providers in any capacity, I have that conflict of interest knowing that the policies that I'm offering them as solutions, I am receiving an additional benefit on outside of just truly giving them the planning that I've promised. So that you can kind of see a difference between fee only and fee based. I think it's even more highlighted as we start to look at the broker dealer side. Anne-Marie, would you want to kind of talk about some
I'll move on to disclosing fees. So I did want to mention that when we think about disclosing fees, if you were to ask a broker dealer what their fees are, they're going to direct you to a 25-page either link to their website or a packet that they've printed out to show you what their fees are. And the difference here is, yes, as a fiduciary, we are required to disclose our fees. However, I can also disclose my fees, and I know every other fee-only financial planner can also disclose their fees in less than 3 sentences or a beautiful half-page chart showing you exactly what you're paying our firm, what you pay in trading costs every year, and what you're paying the underlying fee managers. And so it really comes down to, yes, sure, we all have to disclose fees, but why would I disclose fees in a 25-page document when I can just disclose it in a few words or a chart? So again, it kind of takes that, yes, we're all meeting our fiduciary requirement, but when it comes down to what's right for your client, do you think it's better to, I personally say, I think it's better just to give it to them in a half-page fee rather than the 25-page disclosure. Wanted to bring it down to loyalty to clients. I've heard this before of as a financial planner, you can also be a master to someone else. And so when I think about myself as a fee-only fiduciary to my clients, my only loyalty remains to my clients and no one else, meaning that I have the ability to give advice that is best for them. And that doesn't mean that if you don't work for a broker dealer or in a fee-based model that you can't be loyal to your clients. However, there always is an additional conflict because you have an additional master that's not your client. I have one handshake, it's only with my client. If I work for a broker-dealer, I handshake with my client, but I'm also required to handshake with whoever the overlying broker is at the same point. So again, which one's the more simpler method? For us, it's the loyalty to clients. Last thing I wanted to mention before we transition is transparency of service offerings. Again, I mentioned these 1 pages for fees. Every fee-only financial planning firm has a 1 to maybe 3-page document that says this is everything that we offer. It also can be found in an ADV Part 2, but I know for Abacus, we break it down to what do we do every day for you? What do we do every week, every month, semi-annually, monthly, annually, and it breaks it down exactly so you know as you become a client the expectations or even the quote-unquote book of what services we're offering. A lot of other firms again have that we're tied to a another handshake agreement that's not just the clients, and so their services can potentially be the same. However, they are full of legalese and there's going to be a lot of disclosures that have to be met in order to perceive that information and the services that they're giving. I know that was a lot of talking for Emily and I for the first like 15 minutes. We're going to pause for just a few seconds. Does anyone have any questions, or what questions do you have on what it means for us to be a fiduciary or the fiduciary common sense? Feel free to go ahead and post them in the chat. And as we go through all of this, again, post your questions in the chat because we've got 20 minutes at the end to help you figure out your best path to becoming a financial planner. And we don't want you to forget the question later. I don't see any. All right, so I'm going to transition next and say, okay, we just gave you this big spiel of what it means to be a fiduciary. And to me, the first thing I think about is this ocean. And you got all the fish of financial planners. How do I figure out what type of fish or what body of water do I want to be in? And so we want to narrow it down so that you can figure out what type of firm you would best fit in. And I say fit meaning what's best for you and what type of firm is looking for the type of person for me. Because there is no way that I as a financial planner would fit into every single type of firm out there. And so we thought it'd be best just to go through how Emily and I found each of our firms, and we created this little checklist of, you know, as you're looking, you're doing your research, what can I go through? So I mentioned it before, I wanted to work for a fiduciary. We're in a caring profession and I wanted to do what's right for my clients. So that was a no-go, 100%. I wasn't going to interview with a firm that wasn't a fee only. Again, back then, the rulings were different. It was suitability versus the fiduciary. If you don't know what I mean by rulings, I forgot to mention it before, but recently the Department of Labor came out with their fiduciary rulings. And so theoretically, every financial advisor has to act in the same capacity. But as we went through the last few slides, they're kind of loose, and there's ways that you can act on a better behalf for your clients. Next one, size. So before I started full-time with Abacus, I had an internship at a firm that managed about 330 million of assets under management, which I would consider a little bit on the larger small side, if that makes sense. And they had 8 employees, so on the smaller side. So when I said, what kind of firm do I want to look at? I knew that I needed a firm that was at least 5 to 10 employees because I crave the ability to collaborate in person with people. And I know given my personality, I enjoy the social aspect of working with each other. So I wasn't necessarily tied down. I just knew I wasn't going to be a person that wanted to work at a solo firm or only a firm with 1 or 2 employees. Next thing, culture. When I went to school, before I went to college in my past life, I was an EMT for 7 years. And so it transitioned well for me to go from a caring profession of caring health-wise for individuals to caring for financial lives of our clients. And so I knew I wanted a culture where they had that same mindset of wanting to help each other. And so when I was going through my interview process with Abacus, they actually brought it up first because they saw my resume, but they asked me to serve on our foundation and endowment clients where we're able to give back to the community. And in this instance, I got to work with a group of local firefighters to manage their retirement account. So for me, it just felt like a close connection and they understood the values that I wanted. Last thing I'll mention is client niche. Abacus is, I guess I'll start and say, client niche is one of those things where if you know you want to work with a particular type of client, great. But not everyone says, yes, I only want to work with physicians or government employees or scientists or some sort of nonprofit. Not everyone knows that, and that's okay. When I joined Abacus, I didn't necessarily know what their niche was, so that was a great question for me to ask. And our niche is we serve families with shared assets. And so what that means is typically our ideal client looks like multi-generational assets. So we're working with grandparents, parents, and children, assisting with the transition generation to generation. And truthfully, what that means is we thrive off of complexity, because as you can imagine with every family system, it's a little bit more difficult as you add in more players into the financial planning process. So that was great for me to understand what the culture of Abacus was.
Yeah, great, Anne-Marie, and very similar to kind of everything Anne-Marie just shared. I feel like coming from that financial planning program, it was really ingrained in me that most and foremost, I really wanted to be a fiduciary. And in my eyes, the kind of first path to look for with that is fee only. So that really, initially helps kind of narrow down the pool some. From there, I know that we all are taught and preached on comprehensive financial planning. And that, obviously means a number of things to a number of people. But as I was starting to look at especially those entry-level positions and those job descriptions, I was seeing that, the first year or so could really be focused more in, a specific area like retirement planning or education planning or really any number of things. But I knew coming from the planning program that I came from, having the little bits of experience that I had, that I really wanted to kind of get more involved in that big overview of the comprehensive nature. And I wanted to, for each of my clients, really kind of get to know all of the aspects of their life rather than thinking of myself as a specialist from the start. As we typically see that you end up specializing. But from my perspective, I was really still in the place where I'm trying to figure out what I have that interest in. So having that position where I am going to be able to do comprehensive financial planning and have all of those areas of planning kind of be within my role was a huge kind of box that I was looking to check when I was looking for positions. Very similar on investment philosophy. I feel like that's kind of looped into the comprehensive planning process. Coming from that planning program, was really ingrained to believe in that kind of passive investment philosophy that's very hard, as we've seen the statistics on, to beat the market, especially consistently. And so to think that that is one of the values that I was wanting to add to a client just wasn't really there. Really, from my standpoint, even as I was kind of working through my undergrad degree, investment management was more of a tool to get to the goals and everything that the clients had shared with us. And so as I was looking for a company, I really wanted to make sure that their investment philosophy was going to align with that, but also that the investment work I was going to have doing is going to align with that as well. So at PlanCorp, again, we're a little bit of a larger RIA, so we actually have a specified portfolio management team. I'm really much more hands-off when it comes to investment management because, again, from our perspective at PlanCorp, it truly is a tool to an end to a means. So that's kind of two of those big philosophical areas that I started with. I think I've mentioned throughout this, a lot of that information I was able to decipher through the job descriptions I was looking at. A lot of them kind of go into detail and maybe don't include the full array of what you'll be doing, but gives a pretty good idea into what they're expecting of you, especially starting out. And so as I was, reading some of those job descriptions that was a little bit more narrowed, I knew that that just wasn't what I was looking for. And so as I can remember back to looking at PlanCorp's job description and seeing all of the areas of what I was going to be doing and being a little overwhelmed at the thought of it since I didn't have the full background within it, but I can tell you that it's made me grow immensely just having the kind of comprehensive planning since then. And so I'll tie that lastly into the personal and professional development. With PlanCorp being such a large firm, I have about 80 colleagues, which I'm sure in the real world doesn't sound like a lot, but in especially the financial services world, that's a pretty large company. And so here at PlanCorp, we not only have those CFPs and CFAs, but we have what we call recovering accountants and recovering estate attorneys and tax attorneys. And so I get to work in that kind of group area where I get to work with those specialists and kind of get their knowledge ingrained in me from the start on. As I continue to work with clients, I can pull them in. And so it's really helped my professional development as I'm now leading those relationships in my current role, but also on the personal side. With me having the different managers and the different styles, I could really bring that back to, what do I want my style to be? And now as I'm managing my colleagues, what does that look like from the personal development side? And I think that you can really get an idea for what that's going to look like from the start. And I think that that brings it back to, you want to make sure it aligns with what you want. You know, I thrive in this larger firm, but I can see how a number of people would want the opposite and have more of an intimate relationship. And so I think that really circling back to the value and type checklist that we have before you, I think that this is going to be defined differently by each of you, but once you kind of define it, it will help you as you're looking at those firms and positions know, do they check the majority of my boxes? Do they check my priority boxes? Where are they falling in the realm of what I'm interested in?
I love that, Emily. I love that, again, it's the style, the fit of you and what you want in a firm, and also the same point of, do you fit this firm? Is this what they're looking for when it comes to hiring an employee? So I wanted to start next is, you know, we took our pond of all these fish and we narrowed it down and we said, what kind of fish do you want? Well, you can kind of order it. You know, I'd really like a king salmon, but I might have to stick to the coho salmon. Depends on your preferences. So what I wanted to walk through next is, you know, we said, cool, this is what it means to be a fiduciary. These are the type of firms we have. Now what? How do I prepare? And when we think about the financial planning world, there's essentially two ways that you can go to getting a job. We have our traditional route where you're on natfa.com looking at careers or the CFP board, or maybe you have a job listing through your college, the traditional interview route. And then we have the other route, which you think would be unusual, but every time I talk to someone, myself included, they end up going the route where they either knew somebody or they met somebody at a lunch who then connected them, and that's how they got the job. Because truthfully, in our profession, unless a firm has no interest in growing, if you were to meet someone and you let them know that you're looking for a job, there isn't a single financial planner that's hiring that is going to let good talent walk out the door when they want you to come in. They're always looking to expand themselves on good talent. So if I think about a fork in the road, to the right, think of it, your traditional, let's go the interview route. I'm going to start on the left side to say that, yes, you have to prepare for an interview, and the way you prepare for an interview is the backbone for how you act internally and externally, professionally. And so I wanted to show you guys this. We call it our networking card. This is an actual card that I took from Abacus. I had to kind of stagger it because it was too big for one slide, but it is a card that folds up to the sides of a business card, and every Abacus employee keeps it on us. We pull it out about 2 hours before every networking opportunity. So 2 to 3 times a year, our firm hosts a networking opportunity where we invite a local CPA firm or an estate planning firm in to learn a little bit more about Abacus, and so that we can learn a little bit more about them. And so we always have a group of people that get together to say, great, how do we prepare? How do we engage ourselves during the time? And then what can we do to assess ourselves as we're working to networking? This is a lot of information. We will send the slides after, so either take a picture or you'll get it later. The one thing I wanted to mention on preparing, practicing your handshake. Everyone here, I can tell, is probably already saying, I know how to shake my hand. But one, with COVID, when was the last time you had to professionally shake your hand? And two, have you ever tried to analyze how someone else shakes their hand? So as a review, your hand should be down at your side. You don't want to be extending it all the way in or keeping it too close. Keep it at your side, a 90-degree angle, clasped firmly. We don't want a limp fish, and we don't want a bodybuilder. Nice, firm, and then shake twice. You don't want to be the person that's aggressively shaking or the person that just like lightly puts their hand out for a shake. Seems like a no-brainer. Give it a try with one of your friends. Next one I wanted to mention is engaging. One of these says to listen with curiosity. What we mean by that is when you're networking with people, you shouldn't have an end goal of saying, oh, I'm networking because I want to get a job or because I want to find a CPA to send my clients to work with. At the end of the day, financial planning is a caring profession. It is a relationship profession. Everything we do is built on relationships with clients and professionals. And when I go and I meet a new CPA or an estate planning attorney, I truly just take the time to build a relationship with that person, because you're not going to build a relationship, you're not going to create trust to be able to then either get a job or to refer someone unless you're having intimate conversations. So when I say listen with curiosity, just kind of turn your brain off and actually listen and be present in the moment. And when they ask a question or you ask them about maybe a vacation, instead of just saying, wow, your vacation sounded cool, build a little bit more, be curious and say, you know, what made you choose to go to X? Or, wow, you seem really adventurous. Have you done anything else? Build on the conversation. Then lastly, assess. The one thing I'll point out here is, did I follow the listening rule? This is a little less if you're in an interview type of style. We have a rule of 80% listening and 20% talking. And the reason for that is the last thing you want to do in a conversation is be the person that's dominating the conversation. You want to make sure you're leaving space. So we internally have an 80% listening, because one of our culturals is to keep a beginner's mind and to always be listening. And so that's for us. But think of it more on like a 50-50 level at the absolute least. Okay, that was a lot of talking. I talked about the left side of our fork of, you know, if you're not going the traditional interview route, think about networking and use these tools. I'm going to turn it over to Emily. She's going to talk about the other side of the fork, the right side, which is the more traditional interview style.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Anne Marie. So as I'm sure a number of you have already started to experience, as you're looking for a role in financial services, you'll likely apply for positions through the resume tactic as we're about to talk about, but you'll likely end up meeting people through conferences or different types of networking, just like Anne Marie said. And I really think it's important to kind of maintain and build those relationships. So as we're starting to gear into the different path, you know, as Anne Marie said, you can look at the NAPFA website, the CFP board website, and they'll point you in the direction of the different types of paths that we're looking at and companies that fit each of those. And as you're trying to find those, you know, they're likely going to have those job descriptions that say what they're looking for in their role. And I think that it's really important as you're getting into it to echo that back to them in every way you can. And so the first way you can do that is through your cover letter and resume. And so I'm sure you have a number of people at your universities that have preached this to you, but having a personalized cover letter means so much more than just having a blanket standard cover letter. I like to kind of work under the motto of work harder, not, work smarter, not harder. And so rather than custom writing a personalized cover letter for everyone, my strategy was to have that kind of base cover letter and that typical paragraph where here and there I would edit and personalize it to the description of what they were wanting, the culture that they outlined for their firm, what I was looking for, and kind of matching it up to that. I'm not sure how resumes are formed these days, but I can remember when I was applying, especially for my first position, they really emphasized the benefits of having that resume objective. So if you do follow that path and you have that resume objective, I think that's just another area where you can echo using some of the same adjectives that they're using for the position they're looking for in that person. Describe yourself as if you're fitting that role, so you can show them from the very start, I'm the kind of person that you're looking for. And so I think that's kind of step one. As you're continuing to find some of these positions and find some of the companies, I think it's really important to reach out to your personal and professional networks and see if there is any small world connections. One of the things that I've realized most after getting out of college and moving 4 states away to another city I had never been to is I didn't realize how small of a world we live in. And especially in the finance industry, everyone knows each other and there's somehow always many mutual connections between the two. And so it's really important to reach out not only again to that professional network of different colleagues and professors and that kind of thing, but on the personal side and reaching out to the different people who you've made kind of connections with along the way to see if they have any kind of personal connections along the way as well. Next, I think that these two really feed into each other. I think the base of what you should be doing in preparation for these interviews and applying for these jobs is fully researching and using the website for the company to inform you on what that company is going to be like and how they're presenting themselves. You can not only learn a lot about their culture, about their planning process, their investment philosophy, really checking all of those different boxes, but you can also learn a lot about the types of employees they have, the backgrounds that those types of employees have, and you can really maybe defer if you're going to be able to get that kind of professional development that you might be seeking. Very similarly, and almost kind of a step above, you can see, when I have an interviewee who's read the ADV Part 2, that shows me that they're kind of head and shoulders above a lot of the other candidates, just in terms of wanting to fully understand and comprehend coming in and leaving the interview. And so if you're not familiar with that ADV Part 2 is, you can find it likely on the website. If not, you can search the company and find it very easily because it has to be reported. But that's going to outline a lot of what we've talked about. It's going to outline the financial services they're offering. It's going to outline their fee structure. It's going to outline the type of company they are and the different types of service offerings and everything from there. So that can likely give you a couple different more in-depth questions to be able to ask and relate back to what your role is going to be. And so I think those two things can really give you kind of a step above, which I'll kind of tie into my last 2 points. So I think everyone kind of practices their elevator speech. You should likely have the elevator speech of that 30 seconds of who you are and what makes you tick. But as you're going into the interview, you could likely also prepare an elevator speech for why you are the best fit for the company based on what you know so far. And if you can very effectively articulate that to the interviewees, it's going to put you a little bit ahead as you're kind of getting into those kind of future questions. And that takes me to my last point. As you're researching the website and you're reading the ADV, make notes of questions along the way. That's not just asking about what the workflow is like and what the office looks like. Ask more detailed questions. This is going to be the place where you could be spending your career. And these could be your colleagues that you are truly working with on a day in, day out basis. And having those kind of in-depth, more caring questions to ask in the interview shows that you truly are thinking about those things and thinking of it as a long-term decision.
I'm going to add and narrow it down again. So Emily said, this is how you prepare. Moving into, great, you're ready to jump in, you're sitting in your car, you're preparing for your interview later this week. What comes next? Well, I wanted to start with a fun fact. Your brain internally creates a first impression of everyone within the first 7 seconds of meeting people. Essentially, it's your fight or flight, right? When you think back to, are we going to fight this person or flight? But in reality, it's still very true in financial planning and interviewing. So I wanted to mention what you look like, the eye contact you're making, and shaking hands can go a long way in that first 7 seconds for how someone perceives and makes an impression on you within those first 7 seconds. So professional attire, I wanted to just quickly go over that says, and say you should be dressing for the job you want, not to dress for the job that you have. And so I'm going to quickly go over, if you go into an interview and you don't know what the interview attire is, always go up. Always do business professional. If I know that there is a business casual attire, I'm still likely going to do business professional, because when I go in, if I feel a little out of place, it's easy to take off a suit jacket. It's hard to go get a suit jacket. Or if you're looking underdressed, you want to make sure you're looking overdressed, because it's easier to dress down than it is to dress up when you're already there. Men, making sure you have a suit with a tie that has been recently dry cleaned. It does cost money, but I promise it makes an impact. Your shoes to be polished. Women, if you are wearing a dress, we typically say go for the more conservative look, making sure your shoulders are covered, you're not showing any cleavage, and the length is long enough that nothing can be seen. With conservativeness for men and women, we'd say also veer towards the side of darker colors. I would never be a person to jump into the office wearing a cheetah print dress during an interview. That doesn't mean that you can't wear it later. And once you do an interview, you'll get a good idea of saying, what do people wear? Because I can say even the difference between East Coast and West Coast. West Coast is usually much more laid back than the East Coast is. So just take a good idea of saying, let me dress up for this, knowing that I can always ask questions later. to see what I should be wearing on a day-to-day basis. Eye contact, whether it's virtual or in person, eye contact is extremely important. If you can tell right now, it probably feels, if you're looking at the screen, that I'm staring you in the eye. That's intentional. If instead I'm staring at my camera, staring at my screen, it doesn't feel as personal than if I'm able to look you in the eye. Same thing in person. If you're not making the eye contact, it's going to make a difference. I mentioned it before, shaking hands, also giving a little smile. If you haven't shook hands with someone recently, grab a buddy in a class and say, hey, you want to practice handshaking? Because at this point, practice it now so it's perfect later. Last two things I quickly wanted to mention while you're in an interview are active listening and taking notes. Two very important things. If you ask in an interview of an employee to give you information on X, call it planning, and they give you a 3 or 4 minute response back, the last thing you want to do is say, great, thank you, I appreciate that information. Because yes, that's fine, but in reality, take that moment to ask a little bit more or say, you mentioned this, can you elaborate on this? Or whatever you're doing, reiterate it back to them. So if they're saying a planning process, like, wow, it really sounds like y'all have a holistic approach to planning, rather than just saying, okay, great, thanks, and taking notes. No matter what, I go into a client meeting and I'm taking notes, probably multiple pages of notes, because it's impossible for me to reiterate and regurgitate an hour, hour and a half meeting following a meeting. It's normal. If you are in an interview, it's okay to break eye contact and write down a few things. You're not going to be able to remember all the technology a firm uses, so go ahead and write it down. Or if they're mentioning something and a question pops up, quickly write it down so you can be back in the moment and present. I'm going to turn it over to Emily to talk a little bit more about preparing for questions for interviews.
Perfect. Yeah, thank you so much, Anne Marie. So as I kind of mentioned on that last slide, as we're doing our research, we're preparing a lot of those questions, but potentially, depending on how that interview is going, as you're having that very natural conversation, it might be literally going down your list and answering those questions that you have prepared. And while that's great, it does show something by being able to ask some kind of question. So taking a lot of what Anne Marie just talked about, if you're truly actively listening and taking notes through the conversation, even if they truly answered the questions that you had, you should be able to frame some type of a laboratory question to get them to be able to further explain or develop on something, to show that you really are interested and you were listening and that you want to learn more. So some of the things that we really kind of talked about, I'm sure as you're looking at the financial services industry, as you're starting to talk to advisors in the interview process, whether we're meeting with clients, whether we're talking to one another, I feel like one of the very common things to say is, I'm really curious if you can tell me more about X, or I really liked the way you talked about Y, can you please elaborate on that? That is a really easy way to maybe hit on a topic that you liked earlier that they really answered the majority of your questions on, but to see if they can give you any more depth on that to potentially trigger some additional questions. And then on a very similar side, potentially in that interview, you can learn a little bit about that person or the company in another way, and it might trigger something that we did when we were doing that research, and you can remember, oh, I actually saw that initiative on your website. Could you maybe tell me more about your participation in that, or how your role with that and Plan Corp has grown, and those different types of things. So it, again, just pulls it back to, are you the right fit for the company? Are you showing that to the people as you're getting all of the points of contact? And so I think that this is almost needless to say, but I think that especially as I'm starting to be on that other side and be the interviewer, very often the typical standard end of the meeting is thank you so much for your time, a good handshake, and then they're waiting for that kind of email, did I get the job? And that's pretty much the gratitude that was expressed. And I think that it goes a little bit above and beyond if you can express that gratitude in a different way. And so that's one of the points that we wanted to end on, with something that Anne Marie and I both found kind of value out of and got great feedback on as we were in this process.
Agree. So this is just a sample thank you note. I actually wrote it to Emily and scanned it in, so that's my handwriting. But so essentially, I can easily just say, Emily, I'm grateful for our time. Thank you so much. I look forward to our paths crossing in the future. But instead, if I can take the time to say, I value the time that we had together, and I heard this and this, and I appreciated this and this, it goes a long way to creating a relationship, because I can guarantee, even if you don't get the job or you're just meeting someone, having the ability to follow up, I can guarantee your paths are going to cross again, certainly. So I'm going to end it there. Thank you all for joining us on our Empowering Success webinar. I'm going to stop sharing my screen so we can answer some questions in collaboration. First one that came in, and we should already be saying shame on us for using jargon that people don't know. Christian, thank you for bringing this up. We have a question of, can you remind me what an ADV is again? If you are an investment advisor that manages over $25 million of assets, you are required to register yourself with the SEC. So that is the easiest way. There's two parts of it. So the ADV part one is essentially just like a form that you fill in your name, who you work for. And then the part two is what they call a brochure. And so it allows you to customize it. There's some basics of what you have to include, but allows you to customize it based on what your firm does. And truthfully, it's the easiest way if you're a consumer looking for a financial planning firm, or if you're an interviewer looking to become a financial planner, to know the ins and outs of a firm, particularly because sometimes on websites, it's not the easiest to find it online. Great question. If anyone has any other questions, you can feel free to share your screen, ask about personal questions. This is your time because you're sitting with two professionals in the world. I know we have a few other things queued up. Emily, I'll turn it over to you if you had anything.
Yeah, great. I just wanted to remind everyone that, obviously we're here to chat for the next couple minutes, and feel free to put them in the chat, or, unmute and share it, and we can all kind of have a little chat. But if you are interested in even talking to us more about a particular thing, or if you're a little less comfortable talking to the full group, feel free to reach out to Anne-Marie and myself using those emails, and we're happy to kind of get back to you with a little bit of elaboration on any topics, or even kind of have a more one-on-one conversation. One of the big things that I really liked that Anne-Marie had hit on earlier was kind of finding the culture and the niche that you wanted in your company. I think that, especially as I was kind of looking at firms, I almost didn't know that firms specialized in niches. I more had the perception that advisors kind of had that. And so, I might work at a company and I might have, this one person who really focuses in retirement planning. But as I've gotten into the real world, and some of my friends from Western have gotten other positions, I know a number of people who work specifically with physicians, or with that certain type. So maybe you can talk to us a little bit more about the perspective you've got with that multi-generational clientele.
Of course. I would add that, sorry, you asked about the perception of what it's like to work with multi-generational. Is that what I get? As I'm like going back and forth, I'm like, oh, there's some great questions to answer too. I would say that finding the niche is great. It doesn't mean that I don't work. We work with a lot of clients that have multi-generations of assets. We also work with lots of doctors. So it's great. No matter what, you're not going to only have clients where you're a doctor or an attorney. You're going to get a little bit of everything, but you'll learn that you don't know what you don't know, and there isn't a single day in our profession that you don't learn something else that you can then use for another client. And so it's great to see myself back as a planner with a year or 2 years of experience, and then coming back now and you're like, man, there's just certain things that you can't learn in school, and it's those experiences of being able to work with other people. And truthfully, that's why I enjoy our job, because I'm not the only one on my team. Abacus is very team oriented, so I'm constantly working with someone that has 20, 25 years of experience, and that really does make a big impact on working with different niches and getting to know things as you enter.
That was so great to hear. I see a couple questions coming in. I was just going to address Hadley's question about like kind of sites that we've used or any resources that we know of. I think that you listed a couple of the big ones to look for, just job postings in general. I know that one of the big ways I got introductions to firms that were hiring, that kind of grease that wheel on that same path, was through the NAFA website. I actually had
I think that Emily might have accidentally jumped out, so I'm going to finish her sentence for her. She used the NAPFA website. It's napfa.org. It is a great career option. They list out both internships and full-time positions. That's a good one. The CFP board also has good positions. I will say it's a little harder to weed it out because there's so many jobs out there. Another option is for internships, it might be a little bit more difficult, but it'll give you a good idea that if a company is willing to hire, they might also be willing to do an internship. I have a friend that started a website called simplyparaplanner.com. So that's a good one, especially for entry-level positions. Oh, Emily just messaged me. Yeah, I disconnected for her. That's okay. So Simply Paraplanner is one. There's also a few headhunters. I mentioned before that I was placed by New Planner Recruiting. That's an option. You can partner with them and they'll be able to help find you a firm where it would fit well for you. Great question. Let me just message Emily. She jumped out. Jump back in. Of course, no problem, Hadley. And again, if you are in an area and you're not seeing anything, I sent out 35 letters to financial planning firms, letting them know that I was moving to the Southeast and looking for a job, and probably got about 10 phone calls. And truthfully, it's kind of those building blocks that can help you find something. So if you don't have any in your area and you want to move back home for the summer or stay in school, just Google financial planning firms and reach out. Next question, Ron, thank you for asking. Do Abacus and PlanCorp have any positions available currently for new entrants into the profession? I would say that Abacus has a few positions open. We're not currently hiring for an entry-level support advisor. However, we are hiring for an insurance specialist. And with most firms, just because you join one job doesn't mean you can't morph into another job. So we're hiring an insurance specialist, which we don't sell insurance, but we have someone internally that specializes in, Emily's back. Hopefully she joins. We specialize in being able to service our clients, and having someone that's really specialized in that can add a great value to clients. And then we also have a bookkeeping position open at this point, but that doesn't mean that you can't reach out to someone. I would encourage you to log on to our website, find out who our business manager is, and send them an email. If not, we can always keep you in the rounds for next time, or internships coming up. I would say we don't typically post our internships till the new year, but it doesn't mean that you can't go ahead and get your resume out there already. Emily, we were back to just talking. Ron asked if Abacus and or PlanCorp had any positions open. I'll turn it back over to you. I finished when you cut out, sorry.
Okay. Thank you. Sorry for the technical difficulties on my end. I'm not exactly sure what happened. I think really similar to kind of what Anne-Marie talked about earlier, I don't think that we actually have any entry-level positions open, but PlanCorp, being a growing company, is constantly looking for good talent. So I know our chief talent officer, which is kind of that human resource department at a bigger firm, is always interested in having conversations with people who are looking for positions within the financial services industry, even just to give some perspective and background and advice from her perspective. But I know a number of our kind of entry-level positions had some of those conversations earlier on with Amy, and then she just kind of had them in mind when we ended up having the need, and we ended up reaching out directly to them without even having to do the posting. So I know we mentioned that earlier. I think that that's a lot of how a lot of this kind of has started to work, especially on our PlanCorp end. We're trying to kind of almost stay overstaffed in a way, so we can, because we have been growing so quickly. Between the 3 years that I started, we had $4 billion under management. Now we're closer to 7. So that can kind of show you, especially with the market that we're in that fee-only industry, I think that it is getting a lot more traction of people realizing, why would I not want to work with a fiduciary and someone who truly is in every aspect doing what's best for me. So all of that to say, no, but feel free to reach out if you think you're interested. And I would just circle back to, if you are looking for an entry-level position and either of us or talking about the company has sparked your interest, I would go look at the website for Abacus or for PlanCorp, and then make sure it really does. And if it does, reach out to one of us. We'll be that first initial contact. You're kind of following that same role, reaching out to the networks, even though we don't have that specific connection, we're going to remember that, you know, you joined the webinar and that you showed that interest and that you have this kind of passion to learn more.
A lot of times it's just taking the first step that's the hardest step. And I think for most people, it's like, do I want to do this? Do I reach out? We love doing the right side of the fork of just let me apply. Let me just send my cover letter. The left side makes it a little bit more difficult, but trust me, it makes you grow as a person too. So great question. I'm going to answer one, I think was, what's it like making a switch from an EMT to financial planning? And then Emily, I'll have you answer the one underneath that.
I actually don't see them anymore. So you.
Oh, okay. I'll read it back to you. So
that.
The switch from EMT to financial planning was truthfully kind of flawless, except for you didn't have to see the bad side of being an EMT when people have physical injuries. But being in the caring profession both ways was really easy. And I knew, you know, I went into EMT and I was like, oh, I love this. I'll be in the medical field. It'll be great. And then you realize the toll it takes on you physically. And so I knew that I wanted the caring ability, but also the work-life balance. And what I meant by that was I didn't want to be working 80 hours a week, sometimes night shifts, sometimes during the day. And so I knew financial planning, most people work 8 to 5. It doesn't mean that we don't have late meetings. I have plenty of 7 o'clock meetings or clients that want to come in at 7:30 in the morning, but it allows me to adjust for it. So that was a great question. Emily, the next question said, do you need a degree focused on finance or financial planning to become a financial planner? ? Can acquire specific certifications instead?
I love this question by far, and I would start with just a blanket no. My best friend from college, still to this day, that got a certificate in planning because we were at one of those personal financial planning programs, her entire path and degree was in biology, and she was on that track to be a doctor. And she had one of our kind of personal finance classes that really just teaches you about budgeting and what a Roth IRA is and how to think about a lot of the benefits you have. And I think it really just triggered an interest in her. And so fast forward now, she is a financial advisor who only works with physicians. So I think she really was able to tie in some of that initial interest into what kind of grew with the financial planning track. I would circle back. I think that maybe half my colleagues are either have degrees in psychology, because I think that that really overlaps with a lot of the financial planning on that side, or, you know, broad finance degrees. You know, not a lot of programs have that specific financial planning program. So most of the time you're going to end up with a more broad business or finance degree. And then if you are interested in this track, you're probably looking at something like the CFP, which has additional education requirements if you haven't met those with your bachelor's degree.
I would just add that we are certainly the next generation of financial planners coming in with our education as undergrad solely as finance or financial planning. A majority of the people, like Emily said, that work at my firm were not finance or financial planners or financial planning majors when they were in college. And likely most of them were career changers. You're only just now seeing the new wave of the generation of financial planners coming in where we go to school because this is what we want to do. And so that don't make it limit you. I will say that we had an advisor join that knew he wanted to be a financial planner, but was having difficulty getting his foot in the door. So he took that next step and the initiative to sit for his CFP and take the education. So I would say, yes, there are firms. Most firms will plan to pay for you to take that. But if you're having difficulty or maybe you're having a transition, there's no downside to going ahead and looking at the, different designations you can take. Sit for some of the CFP education, or look at the Series 65. When I was in school, there was a CRC designation, so they asked us to take that on retirement counseling. It was great. Great questions. The next one, someone mentioned that they joined late and they had some questions about being a fiduciary. Want to let you know if you're joining late or if you weren't able to join, we are going to get this posted onto the Institute for Fiduciary's website, and we're going to email out the recording to everyone. But essentially, just to wrap it up, a fiduciary means that I put my clients' needs above my own. And recently, the Department of Labor, the DOL, put out a ruling saying that all investment advisors had to act with a level of acting as a fiduciary on behalf of their clients. What we talked through was, I can always act as a fiduciary, but is there something else I can do to be more, to make it so that the average consumer can better understand what my service offerings are? So things like fees, I can tell you in about 4 sentences or one little chart of how much I charge as a financial planning advisor at Abacus. Whereas if I ask a broker dealer about their fees, they're going to direct me to a 25-page fee disclosure, or they just don't really like to disclose it. And if you ask one of your friends, I can guarantee they're probably going to be like, no, my Morgan Stanley advisor doesn't charge me. Yes, they do. They have to make money. Great question. Any other questions coming in from people? Again, Emily and I are here for you guys. If you have questions, please feel free to email us. We'll send a follow-up in the next couple of days with a recording. We're grateful for all of your time, and we're excited to see that this many people have come in to join us today. And if you have questions or anything, feel free to reach out. Anything you'd add, Emily?
Nope, I think I would just, reiterate, thank you so much. And we're really kind of appreciative that you joined and looking forward to potentially future webinars that might be hosted by the Institute.
All right, thanks everyone. Have a great day, and right on time at 5 o'clock. Look at us.
Bye, y'all.
Bye, everyone. Of course. Have a good one. Getting a few thank yous. Bye, everyone.